This video is now in session, and today we are going to do yet another prediction, which is mainly focused on the East Coast in Virginia and New Jersey. So there are two elections that are happening in both states. There are many elections, but these two are the major states that are at play in 2021. These are the only elections that are statewide and that are scheduled on this year. All the other elections that happened that were statewide related were all kind of special elections. But this is scheduled. This is a normal election, and it's going to be an indicator of 2022, especially with Virginia. What happened in the past few weeks has been very surprising. So let's look at the New Jersey race first because there's a little bit less stakes for that, and obviously I want viewer retention. So for New Jersey, we have Phil Murphy as as the incumbent, and then the person running against him, his name is Jack Ciattarelli, and he used to be the state senator from New Jersey's 16th New Jersey's 16th legislative district, and that is in the Pennington area. So it's a little bit northwest of Trenton, which is in a competitive district. If we look at the 16th congressional district, you can see that Kip Bateman won this seat by 1 percentage point, by less than a percentage point, and it was the closest election in the state Senate. And then we also had the state assembly where there are many competitive elections. But Jack Ciattarelli comes from that district, and he has positioned himself more as a moderate Republican, and that is actually what both Republican gubernatorial candidates have done, which is kind of align themselves more moderately, a little bit away from Trump, especially because New Jersey and Virginia are Democratic states. Virginia being a little bit less Democratic, but nonetheless, in the past few elections, it has gotten more Democratic. So both of them have focused more on taxes, on education, and less about Donald Trump and less about specific social and cultural issues that don't impact everyday Americans. Because education is an example where the culture wars do intersect with everyday American lives, because most Americans are concerned for their child's education, and that also happens to align with concerns from the conservative bloc about education. So that's the main focus that Glenn Youngkin in particular has had, but that Jack Ciattarelli, the Republican candidate, has also taken to heart. And then he talks about taxes, because in New Jersey, New Jersey has one of the highest property tax rates in the nation, and as a result, that has become a big issue among many moderate voters in New Jersey, especially those in southern Jersey, as well as Somerset and Morris County. So when we're looking at this race, it's going to be major not only to look at how much Phil Murphy wins by, because in this we do predict that Phil Murphy will win New Jersey by a likely margin. So that means 5%, above 5%, all the way to 15 percentage points in terms of the margin of victory. But it's not only important to know how much Phil Murphy will win by, but rather it's actually even more important to see the state races. We have a bunch of state assembly races that are being held. In fact, every single assembly race will be up, in every state assembly seat will be up in this election. So as the state senate, every single seat is up for re-election, and as a result, it will be important to see certain legislative districts, like the 11th legislative district in the Senate race, both in the House and in the Senate. It's also important to look at the 16th legislative district. It's important to look at Tom Kaine's legislative district and the 21st legislative district. It's also important to look at Northern Jersey, so the 25th legislative district, and it's also important to look at the 8th legislative district. 8th legislative district is around here near Atlantic City. If I can load this up somewhere, there should be Holly, should PC somewhere. If I keep scrolling down. So, okay, it's not there, but basically there are a couple districts that are up north in Bergen County and Passaic County that have competitive districts. It might be the 39th district, but basically that area is competitive. And the reason why it's important to note these races is because they will be impactful for the House races in 2022 and as well as New Jersey's redistricting process in 2021. Because if any of these Democratic seats that were won in 2017, if any of them flips back to the Republican side in the 2021 election, that means that Democrats will have a trouble in 2022 and that they will need to use redistricting as somewhat of like a shield for Republican gains. If we look at the 11th district, for example, if that turns back to being a Republican seat, then what we'll see is that the Democrats will have a harder time winning New Jersey's 6th district. Now, New Jersey's 6th congressional district is not super competitive, but if it is redrawn in a way that so that it takes more up of Republicans Monmouth County and less of Democratic Middlesex County, then we can start to see problems for Frank Pallone, who is the incumbent for that congressional district. If we look at Southern Jersey, there are a couple of seats there that will be important to note because in 2022 there will almost certainly be questions about Jeff Van Drew, who is the Republican congressional delegate from New Jersey's 2nd congressional district. More importantly, if we look at New Jersey's 5th district, New Jersey's 7th district, and I believe New Jersey's 11th district, all of these 3 districts are competitive because they take part of Bergen County and the Democratic parts of Northern Jersey, and then combine it with the Republican parts of Northern Jersey. So that makes 3 competitive seats in this area. If any of these, if, for example, if the 39th district, if that flips for the Democratic Party, Josh Gottheimer should be on good stand-in for 2022, but it seems unlikely at this point just because the national politics is not trending in favor of the Democratic Party. If we look at Tom Kaine's district, if that district does not flip for the Democratic Party either, if that district stays at where it was in 2017, that will be a little bit worrying for the Democrats in 2022 when Tom Kaine does go against Tom Malinowski in that election, because what we saw in the 2020 election was that Tom Kaine was close to winning that race against Tom Malinowski and lost by a percentage point, which is why he is challenging him again in 2022 when it seems like the favors are in it's more in Republicans' favors because Joe Biden and the congressional Democrats are facing challenges with the infrastructure bill and as well as the budget plan. So that's the state of play in New Jersey right now. There are a bunch of competitive races that we have to look at, and it's going to be important for 2022 because of the House elections. If Phil Murphy happens to not win, that's going to be a major setback for the Democratic Party, and that will be one of the biggest alarming noises that could be made for the Democratic Party if Phil Murphy loses. But it's unlikely that he will lose. If we look at polling, polling suggests that for New Jersey, that Phil Murphy is going to win by likely margins. You can see here that Trafalgar Group has Murphy at 4%, but the asterisk means that it is conducted by a conservative it was conducted for either conservative or a Democratic group, or I guess conservative or liberal group. But if we look at these other pollsters by Monmouth University, Emerson College, Stockton, if you take the averages of these polls together, you get somewhat of a likely margin. Now, what our expectations are is that if Phil Murphy wins by lean margins, that means that Democrats are failing in Congress, and we'll almost certainly see something similar to a 2010 red wave in 2022. If Phil Murphy wins by likely margins from 5% to 10%, then that means that the Democratic vote is being that the Democrats are going back to their former state of not turning out that much to vote, and that in 2022 there will be real challenges when it comes to get out the vote operations. If Phil Murphy wins by 10 percentage points to 15 percentage points, that means that Democrats, if they do pass that, that they should be passing the infrastructure bill in the budget plan, but they should be passing it by 2022. But as of now, it's not affecting races that much. If Phil Murphy somehow wins this race above 15 percentage points, that means that Democrats should be looking. And even if Phil Murphy actually wins by over 10%, that means Democrats should be looking into Murphy's campaign and seeing what they did well. But it's likely that Phil Murphy will win by 5 to 10 percentage points. So that's less than what he won by in the 2017 election. Okay, now let's talk about Virginia. This is the race that most people have been looking for. Virginia, not to throw shade in on New Jersey. In fact, New Jersey's elections are heavily underrated. We've made 2 videos about why New Jersey's elections are underrated, which you can go check out. They're pretty recent. But if we look at the Virginia election, this is where it's going to get really competitive, because what we see with the Virginia polls is that Glenn Youngkin is actually ahead. He's ahead by 1 percentage points by the average collective polls. If you look at these past polls, what you've seen is that it's gotten incredibly close between McAuliffe and Youngkin, and then starting with this Fox News poll, which showed Youngkin ahead by 1% here and 8% here. It's more likely it's 1%, but then you have that follow through by Insider Advantage, by Research Co., and by Trafalgar Group. Then that starts to create some concern for the McAuliffe campaign, because Youngkin is ahead for the first time, and the fact that it's so close to the election is even more worrying for the McAuliffe campaign, and it shows that for the Democrats, if they do not win this election, if they do not win the governor's election, then the Democrats cannot use Trump as a playbook for 2022, that they cannot keep talking about Trump in 2022. And even if McAuliffe does win, it's likely that Democrats cannot use Trump that much in 2022, because what we've seen is that McAuliffe has tried to brand Glenn Youngkin as a Trump candidate, even calling him Glenn Trumpkin many times. But basically that kind of constant use of the name Trump may backfire against the Democrats. McAuliffe trying to nationalize the Virginia election, gubernatorial election, may backfire against him, because what we've seen is that all politics is local. Politics is local, and that is how Republicans have been able to make a lot of infrastructure in national elections, which is because they focus on they focus more locally than the Democratic Party. So what is our prediction for this race? This is going to be something like, it's a very competitive race. We didn't expect that Youngkin would actually be ahead, but by the end of it all, we can say that Youngkin will be winning, is likely, or I guess we predict that Youngkin will win the Virginia gubernatorial election by a tilt margin. It will be incredibly close between Youngkin and McAuliffe. But the thing is, McAuliffe has simply just not run a good campaign. He was the incumbent governor of Virginia. He has the expertise, and yet he doesn't really mention much about that. Rather, he mentions about he tries to attack Glenn Youngkin rather than reinforcing himself. And that's a problem, because when you make it about the other person, you have to make sure that the other person is really bad. You have to, and as bad as Donald Trump in terms of, I guess, candidate profile, in terms of optics, because otherwise then the spotlight gets thrown to the other side, and if the other side is good about it, then they can use that spotlight that the Democrats gave to their advantage. And that's exactly what Glenn Youngkin was doing in the past few weeks, by using the spotlight given by Terry McAuliffe to say, no, he's wrong, here's actually what my views are, here are my policies. Meanwhile, Terry McAuliffe does not get to outline his policies, and by not focusing on him being a former governor of Virginia, then he doesn't get to say that he is elected, that he can run Virginia, because he's shown to do that before. And thus, he's created a really bad campaign for himself that has led to Youngkin going ahead in the polls in just the last week before the election. So that's the Virginia gubernatorial race. And basically, the thing to note is that if you look at Fairfax County, this is where most of the suburb votes are going to be. The main question is whether or not Youngkin will be able to get 34% or more of the vote in Fairfax County. If he is able to do that, then he is likely to win the Virginia gubernatorial election, because he has the standing of the Republican base in this area, and as well as in this area of Virginia. And the thing is, if Glenn Youngkin does actually win this race, then it's not a playbook for the Democrats in 2022, but rather it's a Republican playbook, because it shows that there is a way for you to campaign in such a way that doesn't anger Trump voters, but also tries to appeal to moderate voters. And it's a hard thing to do. It's a thing that Democrats have tried to do for decades. But for the Republicans, if Glenn Youngkin can pull it off, if he can win the election tomorrow, or I guess today, I'm recording this yesterday, if you're watching this video today, if Glenn Youngkin does manage to pull this off, it's going to be a major setback for the Democrats, because it gives Republicans a framework to work on for the 2022 elections. So we rate this race as tilt Republican, which means a flip from the Democratic incumbent Ralph Northam to Glenn Youngkin. It's a race that he wasn't projected to win in the beginning, but it seems like he will. And we also have to look at the Virginia House of Delegates races and the Senate race, because those races will be important to determine what happens to Abigail Spanberger, and as well as in Virginia's 2nd District. So that's what's happening in Virginia and New Jersey. There's also going to be a special election in Ohio that will deal with Marsha Fudge's seat, I believe. The Democratic candidate there will most likely win in Ohio's 15th district. The Republican candidate will most likely win there. But these are the two major races, Virginia and New Jersey. And it is important to look at both of them. If you're looking at the two elections, look at both of them, not just Virginia, but also New Jersey. Because even though New Jersey may not be as competitive as Virginia, the results there can still show a lot. In fact, they could show a lot more, given that for 2022 in the House races, given that a lot of the legislative districts in New Jersey corresponds to the competitiveness of the House races in New Jersey, because there are a lot of competitive House elections in New Jersey compared to Virginia. So that's just something to note. If you are in either state, please vote. Your vote matters no matter which party you're in, because it's just a part of American democracy. It's like brushing your teeth. Just go do it. It's for your own sake, and it's for the sake of other people. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. We will most likely make a video tomorrow about analyzing both of these races. But until then, this video is now adjourned. Happy election night, and I'll see you in the next one.